Hello, how's it going, everybody? Today we're jumping into Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 8. We're going to go to 11. Let me change that here. There we go. Okay, let's get the text up. Make sure we're not lagging, all that stuff. Then we can get started. Give me 1 second. All right, let's see. Give me 1 second. All right, let's see. Okay, we're good. All right, let's get the text up and let's get going. Wait. I don't have my headphones plugged in. You guys are hearing it. I'm not hearing anything. Okay, there we go.
Now concerning things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. And if anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, this one is known by him.
So now concerning things offered to idols. Okay, look at the subheading. Be sensitive to the conscience. Paul talked about clean and unclean things and how that comes down to your conscience. So if it's coming down to your conscience, you definitely need to be sensitive to it. So now concerning things offered to idols. Should we be able to eat it or not? We know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. And if anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, this one is known by him. Okay? So don't. Well, I don't. Before I try and give an interpretation, let's keep going. But what I'm thinking it's saying is, don't rely on your human knowledge. But let's see.
Therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is no other God but one.
Okay, so is he saying that it doesn't matter? You can eat something offered to an idol because an idol is nothing?
For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we live.
But what if these idols are representations of things that these people pray to, and the things that these people pray to? What if they're demons? What if they're fallen angels? So, would you want to eat something knowingly that's been offered up to them? That's why I guess it comes down to your conscience. And there's no strict line, I guess.
However, there is not in everyone that knowledge. For some, with consciousness of the idol, until now eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. But food does not commend us to God. For neither if we eat are we the better, nor if we do not eat are we the worse. But beware lest somehow this liberty of yours becomes a stumbling block to those who are weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols?
Yeah, that's a slippery slope, because what type of image are you putting out there? You know? Which is why God in the Old Testament, he wanted to create a division between the children of Israel and the rest of the world, right? He wanted there to be a line to like so that we can be an example to the rest of the world, right? So there needs to be a difference. We can't just be eating food offered to idols, because it's technically not wrong. It's just food. But if you don't eat of the food of offered to an idol, someone who regularly eats food offered to an idol sees that and they'll be like, hey, why? Why are you doing that? And then that's an opportunity to explain. So God wanted to set his people apart from the rest of the world, which is the idea of circumcision came in, the way they dressed and all that stuff. A lot of pretty much everything that they did was, I mean, God wanted the children of Israel to go around and kill all of the pagan nations because he knew the negative influence on them. So this here, hey, you can technically, going and eating some food that's offered to an idol is not wrong because it's just food. But what can that lead to? What doors are you opening with that? And are you exposing yourself to temptations that you don't need to be? So I get what Paul's saying, but he's a pretty liberal guy, Paul.
To eat those things offered to idols? And because of your knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died? But when you thus sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble.
But I get his viewpoint. He's getting to what really matters, right?
Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? Are you not my work in the Lord? If I am not an apostle to others, yet doubtless I am to you. For you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. My defense to those who examine me is this: do we have no right to eat and drink? Do we have no right to take along a believing wife, as do also the other apostles, the brothers of the Lord, and Cephas? Or is it only Barnabas and I who have no right to refrain from working?
Cephas is Peter.
Whoever goes to war at his own expense, who plants a vineyard and does not eat of its fruit, or who tends a flock and does not drink of the milk of the flock? Do I say these things as a mere man? Or does not the law say the same also? For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. Is it oxen God is concerned about? Or does he say it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he who plows should plow in hope, and he who threshes in hope should be partaker of his hope. If we have sown spiritual things for you, is it a great thing if we reap your material things? If others are partakers of this right over you, are we not even more?
It's so odd that he has to say these type of things. It's just weird to vocalize this.
Nevertheless, we have not used this right, but endure all things, lest we hinder the gospel of Christ. Do you not know that those who minister the holy things eat of the things of the temple, and those who serve at the altar partake of the offerings of the altar? Even so, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should live from the gospel. But I have used none of these things, nor have I written these things that it should be done so to me. For it would be better for me to die than that anyone should make my boasting
Good
void.
evening, Crystal. How are you
For
doing?
if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yes, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. For if I do this willingly, I have a reward. But if against my will, I have been entrusted with a stewardship. What is my reward then? That when I preach the gospel, I may present the gospel of Christ without charge, that I may not abuse my authority in the gospel. For though I am free from...
Yeah, you don't want to you don't want to put, and Paul was expressed that in yesterday's reading also, or was it the time before that, where you don't want to put your own, put your own seasoning onto the gospel, right? You want to give the gospel straight, and we were seeing hints of that, right? We had the teachings of Paul, we had the teachings of Apollos, we even had the teachings of Jesus, and the followers of Jesus were like, hey, look, we're following Jesus. Who are you guys following? So there's divisions among the people, right? And you can see how that leads to the denominations of today. That's only natural. People are going to have different interpretations and different viewpoints, and they're going to group together. And that's how denominations formed, right? You have different people preaching in different areas of the world. So those lines of thinking spread into those areas, and, like minds attracted, and we had the creation of multiple denominations. But Paul is essentially saying, get down to the root of the matter, right? Go straight to the gospel and get the root, and focus on that. Because, we're all Christians in the end, right?
May not abuse my authority in the gospel.
Yeah.
For though
So he didn't want to put too much of his own flavor onto the gospel, right? Just keep it pure.
I am free from all
I think that's what he's saying.
men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more, and to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews.
For though I am free from all men, right? That's because he's on that spiritual level, right? We talked about that. He is free from all men. He's not worried about being judged by men or anything like that. I have made myself a servant to all. I like this line. For though I am freed from all men, he's looking at things from a higher perspective, that big picture that Jesus wants us to look at things. So I've made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. So did he act a certain way to convert certain people? Crystal says, did you know there's a division in the sky, the sun and the clouds and the stars? When one thinks about it, I like thinking of division that way. What do you mean? What do you mean, Crystal? A division in the sky, the sun, the clouds. Oh, I okay, I see what you're saying. Okay. I see what you're saying. That's an interesting way of thinking of things. But here, so he's acting like a Jew to win more Jews?
To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became.
Okay. So he's becoming like a Jew to win over Jews. And those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. And he becomes like those without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ. So he acts like he's not under the law toward Christ, not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ. So he's under the law toward Christ. He's focusing on the Christ aspect, but not under the law toward God. But he's saying not being without law toward God, but under the law toward Christ. So how is that to those who are without law? He's not when he talks to these people, he's not talking about the law of Moses. This is what I'm assuming. He's not talking about the law of Moses. He's not talking about all that type of stuff. He's just focusing on the law of Christ. So he's changing his approach depending on who he's speaking with. And we saw that firsthand. That was one of the first things we noticed, right? When he was talking to the Greeks, the philosophers, the way he was speaking. And then we see that when he's talking to the Corinthians. We saw that when he was talking to the Church of Rome. What he says and how he says it changes depending on who he's talking to. I hope the overall message doesn't change. I don't think so far from what we're seeing, the overall message isn't changing. It's his approach and what he's focusing on that seems to change. But his belief system seems to be staying consistent, which is good.
Without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be partaker of it with you. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown.
That's really cool. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? So run in such a way that you may obtain it. Get to the goal. We all have the same goal, but our methods for achieving that goal may be different. So I think what he's saying is how we should all have the same fundamental belief, but we shouldn't judge each other for, like how he was talking about, with their conscience and everything, right? How some might consider some things unclean, others might consider other things fine because they were born and brought up a certain way, right? Like the Gentiles wouldn't consider something unclean because they weren't brought up like a Jew. But they both accept Jesus as their Savior. So they're both running towards the same prize, but the way they're running is a bit different. That's interesting. Crystal says our prize is heaven, isn't it? Yeah, that's the prize.
In all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. Therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I...
That imperishable crown, that's what you're talking about, Crystal. Heaven. The crown we're going to be wearing that's imperishable in heaven.
Not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified.
What does that last bit mean? Let me pull up a commentary for that. Oh. Wait. Okay. First Corinthians 9 commentary. What verse was it?
Crown.
24. Around there. So, I run, I fight. Sporting events were big in Paul's day, as well as in our own. This was especially meaningful to the Corinthians because their city was the center for the Isthmian Games, second in prestige to the ancient Olympics. Okay, so here's another prime example of Paul changing his approach depending on who his target audience is, right? He's using metaphors that are relevant to his target audience. So he's doing what he needs to do in order to get the message across. Paul often uses figures from arena competition, at least 12 different references in his letters, including examples of runners, boxers, gladiators, chariot racers, and trophies. Because that's what people like. This is their entertainment, right? So people like this. It's like it's like a pastor nowadays using sports or any pop culture references in their sermons to engage the audience, because he knows those are attractive things, like they draw people in. And that's what Paul said, right? He changes his approach depending on his target audience in order to win them over. I wouldn't consider that something. I don't think that's manipulative. I know it probably sounds that way, but I mean, he's referencing running and whatnot because he knows these people are familiar with that and that's what they like. So he's not. I don't think he's not manipulating them to convince them of his way of thinking. He's just using references that they will understand. Paul tells us to train and compete as athletes who really want to win. Without effort, nothing can be won in a sporting event. Everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. To compete as an athlete, one must be temperate. This term refers to the manner in which Roman athletes had to train for 10 months before being allowed into the games. An athlete must refuse things that may be fine in themselves, but will hinder the pursuit of his goal. Even so, the Corinthians must refuse things that are fine in themselves, like meat sacrificed to idols, because having them may hinder the pursuit of the important goal. An imperishable crown, a heavenly reward that will never pass away. So I discipline my body. Discipline is a weak translation. The ancient Greek word means to strike under the eye, to give a black eye. Paul didn't want his body to lord it over his entire being. Bring into subjection literally means to lead about as a slave. Paul made sure that his body was the servant and his inner man was the master. The desires of his body were not going to rule over his entire self. So Crystal says, but we cannot all wear the crown and suffer like Jesus did. But why? Is what I don't understand. They're not referring to the crown of thorns, like the suffering that Jesus did. They're just referring to, I think we're all going to get crowns in heaven, right? And we're going to get jewels on that crown. So it's just showcasing the eternal reward. Like how you mentioned earlier, our prize is in heaven, right? That eternal reward that we're going to have once we reach heaven. Crystal also said, he referenced the cross, like that whoever picks up the cross, doesn't that mean to suffer like he did? That's how I understand it. I don't think he didn't, I don't remember him mentioning the cross here. Just the crown. Lest when I have preached to others, Paul sees himself as both a herald of the games, who announced the rules, and as a participant. Paul told others the rules of the game, and he had to follow the rules himself. That's good. He's following them himself. He's not just preaching. Lest I myself should become disqualified. In this context, disqualified probably doesn't refer to the loss of salvation, but to the loss of reward. But isn't our reward heaven? Disqualified. Signifies such a person as the judges of the games. Reject as not having deserved the prize. So Paul himself might be rejected by the great judge, and to prevent this, he contended, and he denied himself and brought his body into subjection to his spirit, and had his spirit governed by the Spirit of God. So Clark seems to think that being rejected by the great judge, which would mean your loss of salvation, right? You're not entering heaven. So that is the reward, right? Entering in heaven, you're that eternal reward.
Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud. All passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with most of them God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things became our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. And do not become idolaters as were some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play.
That's why I'm saying it's important not to partake of the food that's been offered to the idols. Not because the food is inherently bad or going to do something to you, but you're just exposing yourself to that. Crystal says the way I understand it is the crown of thorns, and then you get the eternal reward. I don't think he's referring to the crown of thorns at all here. I think he's just referring to I think he's just using that to refer to that eternal reward that we'll receive in heaven, But I guess you could say through that crown of thorns, we are receiving our crown.
Rose up to play. Nor let us commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. And in one day 23,000 fell. Nor let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed by serpents. Nor complain, as some of them also complained, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you, except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men. Judge for yourselves what I say. The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not the communion of the blood of Christ? The bread which we break, is it not the communion of the body of Christ? For we, though many, are one bread and one body. For we all partake of that one bread. Observe Israel after the flesh. Are not those who eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar? What am I saying then? That an idol is anything, or what is offered to idols is anything? Rather, that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the Lord's table and of the table of demons.
So is he saying now we shouldn't partake of things offered to idols? But didn't he make the case that it doesn't really matter?
Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? All things are lawful.
See, so there is some sort of line there that is drawn that we shouldn't do, right? Paul was initially saying that the food isn't inherently bad, right? If you offered it to an idol or not, it's offer a banana to an idol or not, it's still a banana. Right, so eating the banana is not going to do anything, But here, he's saying, if God saw you eating food that was offered to an idol, you think he'll be happy? Probably not. So there is something inherently wrong there, in eating the food that's offered to an idol. which is why flee from idolatry. Which is why God wanted to create, and the Old Testament wanted to create that division between the rest of the world and the Jews, which is probably how that division between the Jew and the Gentile came about, right? Why there was such a division between the two. Let's see if my Bible has anything to say. 10:14. Pagan worship is a violation of the believer's union with Christ. The idols themselves are not a threat. The danger lies in the demons, who, unknown to the worshippers, are the real objects of idol worship. Right? So that's what I was thinking, right? Because if they're offering these things to these idols, who are these idols physical representations of? Are they of demons? So these people who are praying to idols, they're actually praying. It's not just they're not praying to nothing. They're praying to demons. They're praying to fallen angels. If that's the case, you can see why God hated idolatry and paganism, because they're worshiping fallen angels. And that's kind of scary. What else does my Bible say? The idol themselves are not a threat. The danger lies in the demons, who unknown to the worshippers are the real objects of idol worship. You cannot drink. Paul reminded the Corinthians of the fellowship and unity that they had in participation in the Lord's Supper. Participation in idol worship is a violation of that unity. So my question is, would eating something that's been offered to an idol, is that participating in idol worship? Here's the thing. I think Paul was talking about if somebody ate a banana that was offered to an idol, didn't know that it was offered to an idol, and he ate it, nothing's going to happen to you. There's nothing inherently wrong with the banana, you know? But once you look past that, the principle of it, you shouldn't be taking part in that. I think that's what's being said here. I keep forgetting how literal Jews take things. At least in the Bible so far we've been seeing, they take things very literally. So that's probably why Paul needed to break it down to the point where it's like, hey, it's still a banana, you know? The very act of eating the banana is not actually doing anything.
Things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not...
Crystal asked, isn't what we are watching on YouTube an idol? It depends on how you view it. I think, and that's what Paul is saying. You can idolize absolutely anything. But that doesn't mean everything is an idol. It depends on how you view it. If you idolize it, then it's an idol. If you don't, then it's not an idol to you, you know?
The Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the Lord's table and of the table of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market.
What does edify mean? To instruct. That makes sense. Okay. Instruct and improve, especially in moral and religious knowledge. Okay.
Asking no questions for. Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market, asking no questions for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness.
Eat whatever is sold in the meat market, asking no questions for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. Is he talking about the way the meat was killed, right? Because it needs to be, the blood needs to be drained and all of that. Don't worry about that. Don't even ask that. Don't, if the meat was strangled, right? I believe they didn't eat meat. They didn't eat meat if the animal was strangled to death. $10.25. Paul himself did not ask whether meat was sacrificed in the temple because pagan worship could not contaminate what God had made clean. Okay, they were tying it back to the pagan worship. Okay, so, but I think Paul could probably apply that to the way the way the animal was killed and stuff like that too. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market, asking no questions for conscience sake. Why? Why is he telling you not to ask questions for conscience sake? He's trying to get you to change your perspective then? Weren't we just talking about how we shouldn't participate in anything related to idolatry? Like God wouldn't want us eating. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the Lord's table and the table of demons. But if you don't know about it, it's fine. And don't ask any questions just in case that it is been offered to idols. I don't get that logic. Why not ask? I guess because he doesn't want it to become like, do this because of this and this, don't do this because of this and this, right? He didn't want it to become, I'm following the law, I'm not following the law. He wanted the focus to be on the core of the issue. And he didn't want to get people lost into, hey, that's been offered to an idol, therefore I can't eat that. This hasn't been offered to the idol, therefore I can eat that. Hasn't been offered to an idol, therefore I can't eat it. He didn't want it. I guess he didn't want it to become like a right and wrong thing, and I'm just following the law because for the law's sake. And then we saw how what that led to. Hey Ricky, how's it going? What do you think about this? It's interesting. Let me pull up a commentary. First Corinthians 10 commentary. $25. How can Paul say this in light of what he said in 1 Corinthians 10, 20 to 21, right? It seems like a contradiction. What's going on here? The things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons. I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. You cannot partake of the Lord's table and of the table of demons, simply because the meat itself isn't infected by demons and can thus be eaten. I get that, but he specifically said don't even ask if it was offered. Because if you ask and they say yes, now it's going to affect your conscience, and you're going to be like, your conscience is going to tell you maybe I shouldn't eat that. But if you didn't ask, you would eat that you'd eat that fine. Or you may be thinking, dang it, maybe should I, what if this was offered to an idol? Maybe I shouldn't be eating it. So it also depends on your reaction, I guess. But that's what I'm thinking. Maybe Paul just didn't want our minds to think about that. Don't worry about it. Just eat it. Paul's warnings in 1 Corinthians 10:15-22 have to do with the atmosphere of fellowship with demons at the pagan temple, which is to be avoided, not the food itself. But see, if you know that the food that you're eating was offered to demons, that does have to do with the atmosphere. Because then that'll change what's going on in your head. That'll change how you're looking at it. The sacrifices lost their religious character when sold in the meat market. So it was permitted to eat meat that may have been sacrificed to an idol at a private table. I think this guy's missing the point. It's not that they lost their religious character once they're being sold or anything like that. I think it all comes down to like what Paul initially talked about was the conscience. It's just I find it odd that he said don't inquire about it. At the butcher shop, some of the meat was sacrificed to idols and some of it was not. Paul says if you aren't going to partake of the atmosphere of the pagan temple, the meat itself doesn't matter. Don't even ask, and it won't even bother you. Yeah, again, he's being very literal. The meat itself, yeah, it's not going to bother you, obviously. Yeah, we know that. I guess that's the message he's trying to get across. The meat itself is not going to bother you. So people were actually worried that if they ate the meat, that it's physically going to affect them or spiritually going to affect them, that the meat itself has some sort of quality, that has some sort of attached quality from the offering to an idol. But that's not the case.
Are we stronger than he? All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market, asking no questions for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. If any of those who do not believe invite you to dinner, and you desire to go, eat whatever is set before you, asking no question for conscience sake.
Asking no question for conscience sake. So he's also talking about if it's clean or unclean, right? Because it's up to your conscience.
But if anyone says to you, this was offered to idols, do not eat it for the sake of the one who told you, and for conscience sake.
So if you're aware of it, don't eat. Because it's up to your conscience. You're going to feel guilty for eating something that's been offered to an idol if you know it was offered to an idol. You don't want to partake in that, right? So, but if they don't say anything and you don't know about it, the effect of that would be your conscience isn't going to be, bothering you or whatever. So you can. It's not a matter of you can or can't. It's the matter of, do you think what you're doing is wrong? If you feel what you're about what to do is wrong, then don't do it. That's essentially what he's saying.
Do not eat it for the sake of the one who told you, and for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's, and all its fullness. Conscience, I say, not...
He keeps saying that, for the earth is the Lord and all its fullness. So everything on earth is from God, and therefore it's for you. So you shouldn't feel like anything is off limits like that. I think that's what he's trying to get that with that. He said that multiple times so far.
Your own, but that of the other. For why is my liberty judged by another man's conscience? But if I partake with thanks, why am I evil spoken of for the food over which I give thanks? Therefore, whether...
Let me pause that. Conscience, I say, not your own, but that of the other. For why is my liberty judged by another man's conscience? If I partake with thanks, why am I evil spoken of for the food over which I give thanks? What does that mean? 29. Let's look. Does my Bible say anything? Nope, skips it. But conscience, I say not your own, but that of the other. For why is my liberty judged by another man's conscience? If an unbeliever invites you to dinner, don't get into a debate about the meat with them. Don't ask, and it won't bother you. Notice that Paul does not prohibit socializing with non-Christians. He only prohibits the meal of fellowship at the pagan temples. Because anyone says to you, this was offered, but if anyone says to you, this was offered to an idol, do not eat. Here Paul has in mind the setting where a Christian is warned about the food by his unbelieving host, or a Christian host with a sensitive conscience. In that case, it is clear the person thinks it is wrong for Christians to partake of meat sacrificed to idols, so don't eat it for the sake of conscience. But if I partake with thanks, that is, if I can eat with a clear conscience and offending no one else's conscience, why am I evil spoken of? Since the food itself is not the problem, no one should judge another Christian who can eat meat sacrificed to idols, as long as they don't violate their own conscience or someone else's. It may seem that Paul is being inconsistent, but he is being very consistent according to one principle: liberty within the limits of love. Yeah, he's being consistent in that it's up to your conscience. Verse 29. Conscience, I say, not your own, but that of the other. For why is my liberty judged by another man's conscience? But if I partake with my thanks, why am I evil spoken of for the food over which I give thanks? Let me pull up another commentary, because I'm 9:29. Okay. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 commentary. Let's go to Bible Hub. And let's pull up all the commentaries and go to 29. Conscience, I say, not thine own, but of the other. In the previous verse, there's nothing to indicate the obligation to not eat the meat under such circumstances arises from a consideration of the tenderness of others' conscience. Here, any danger of mistake as to whose conscience is meant is removed. Of course, I mean his conscience, not yours, for no other man's scruples are to bind my conscience. while the opinion or weakness of another is never to make my conscience waver from what it knows to be true, it may often be a reason for our sacrificing in act some personal indulgence. I'm confused. I'm not understanding this. Conscience, I say, not thine own, but of the other. So are we supposed to abide by the conscience of the other person? Okay, I see. So that person is feeding you meat that was offered to an idol, and he feels like it's fine. So don't worry about it. Because you don't know it's offered to an idol or not. So I guess in a way you're giving up to that person's conscience. Conscience, I say, not your own, but that of the other. For why is my liberty judged by another man's conscience? But if I partake with thanks, why am I evil spoken of for the food which I give thanks? But I wouldn't think you're evil spoken of. You're not. I think that's probably a rhetorical question. Let's read the next section.
Am I evil spoken of for the food over which I give thanks? Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Give no offense either to the Jews or to the Greeks or to the church of God. It doesn't matter. Just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. Imitate me, just as I also imitate Christ.
But, I mean, it's not recorded anywhere if Jesus ate unclean things. Jesus abided by the law of Moses. So, Paul is a bit different in that regard. He said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. But Paul is staying true to that big picture thinking. He definitely has the right perspective. Well, let me see some of these comments. Crystal said, and why are there two tables? Is Satan sitting at one and Jesus sitting at the other? And is one brighter than the other? I don't get that part. Two tables. Did I miss something? 1 Corinthians 10. Are you thinking of food that's offered to the idols and food that's not offered to the idols? Like, in that sense? Where is it? King James. I don't know. I didn't see it. Table. Oh, okay. I think it's not a literal table. They're figurative tables. You cannot partake of the Lord's table and of the demon's table. So we can't. I would say we can't partake in things that are related to demons and whatnot, idols and demons and all that stuff, and also partake in the Lord's table. You can't do both. You can do one or the other, right? But the distinction here was food that was offered on the demon's table. It's still food, right? So if you don't know which table it came from, you can eat it, right? Because you don't know any better. But if you know and it affects your conscience, and then obviously, right? Because you can't partake of the Lord's table and of the demon's table. You can't partake in idol worship and worship God at the same time. You're missing the whole point. And that's something the children of Israel did in the Old Testament a few times, right? Where they were worshiping God, but they were also worshiping all these other idols. So they were missing the point. Like, you can't have two masters. And Ricky was saying, if it's clean to you, it's clean. That's true. That's what Paul is saying. The word must be clean. Leviticus 5:3. Or if he touch the uncleanness of man, whatsoever uncleanness it be that a man shall be defiled withal. So yes, you see stuff like that, right? You'd be considered unclean back in the Old Testament. But what Paul is teaching now, it all comes down to a matter of your conscience. So he's really doing away with an objective state of clean and unclean. And I understand how that falls into the bigger picture, right? If you have that big picture thinking, I understand how that falls into that. But who gave us the laws for clean and unclean? You know? So should we still follow that or no?
Now I praise you, brethren, that you remember me in all things and keep the traditions just as I delivered them to you. But I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, the head of woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonors his head. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, for that is one and the same as if her head were shaved.
Okay. So, but I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, the head of every woman is man, and the head of every Christ is God. So it's like a hierarchy. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonors his head. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. Wait, didn't the Jews cover their heads? Everybody covered their heads when they prayed? For that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. For if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. But it is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved. Let her be covered. What happened to? It's up to your conscience, because I feel like your hairstyle, whether your head is covered or not, doesn't impact anything. Just like what you eat is not really impacting anything. So I feel like, what is he saying here? Let's pull up a commentary. 11. Paul again speaks sarcastically to the Corinthian Christians. In fact, they did not remember Paul in all things. They disregarded him as they saw it fit. Additionally, they did not keep the traditions as they should have. keep the traditions is a scary phrase to many Christians. It brings forth the idea that Christians are to be bound by ancient, outdated traditions in their conduct and worship. But the traditions Paul delivered to the Corinthian Christians were simply the teachings and practices of the apostles received from Jesus. Paul was not talking about ceremonies and rituals, but about basic teaching and doctrine. But he was just talking about covering your head, shaving your head, and stuff like that. That's not basic teaching and doctrine. The head of every man is Christ. The head of every woman is man. The head of every Christ is God. With these words, Paul sets a foundation for his teaching in the rest of the chapter. Simply put, Paul makes it clear that God has established principles of order, authority, and accountability. Head is an important word in this chapter. Some consider head to mean nothing more than source, in the sense that the head of a river is its source. Though this word can mean this, Paul is not simply saying man came from Jesus, woman came from man, and Jesus came from God. Though that simple understanding is true, it goes much deeper. Because in biblical thinking, a source has inherent authority. If something comes from me, therefore, there is some appropriate authority I have over it. In its sense, head has the idea of headship and authority. It means to have the appropriate responsibility to lead the matching and the matching accountability. It is right and appropriate to submit to someone who is our head. With this understanding, we see Paul describes 3 headship relationships. Jesus is head of every man. Man is the head of woman. And God, the Father, is the head of Christ. Because Paul connects the 3 relationships, the principles of headship are the same among them. But didn't we just talk yesterday about how Paul sort of likes the idea of being single for women and men, because if a woman is married, then she has some allegiance to her husband and needs to take care of him and her family and whatnot. And that can, like a perspective might not be focused on God 24/7 because she has earthly duties to fulfill. So wouldn't he be against the idea of that man is the head of a woman? I'm confused. There's some contradictions here, I feel like. What's Crystal saying? And why? I read that, right? Are the 2 tables of the Last Supper? No, those 2 tables, the table of demons and the table of Christ, I think it was. That's just simple. That's just a metaphor, It's I don't think it's tying to the tables of the Last Supper or anything like that. And how did that go again? One was a lesser light. The only reference to lesser light that I remember of is talking about the moon being a lesser light next to the sun. I don't know. I don't remember any other reference to lesser light. I don't remember. But this here is... Okay, so let's keep going and let's see if they try and explain it. The head of every man is Christ, the head of every woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Therefore, women in the church have 2 options in their attitude towards their head. They imitate the kind of attitude men have towards Christ, showing a rebelliousness that must be won over. Or women can imitate the kind of attitude Christ displayed towards God the Father, loving submission to him as an equal. It is essential to understand that being under authority does not equal inferiority. Jesus was totally under the authority of God the Father, yet he is equally God. When God calls women in the church to recognize the headship of men, it is not because women are unequal or inferior, but because there is a God-ordained order of authority to be respected. But what about the head coverings? Because of this order of authority, it is inappropriate for men to pray under a head covering, and inappropriate for women to pray without a head covering. What does that even mean? Because of this order of authority, how does that lead to it's inappropriate for this? The idea of a head covering was important in this and many other ancient cultures. To wear the head covering, or veil in some translations, was a public symbol of being under the authority and protection of another. So you can see how Islam gets it, where their beliefs are from also. It was a custom both among the Greek and Romans and among the Jews, an express law that no woman should be seen abroad without a veil. This was and is a common custom through all the East, and none but public, go without veils. Praying or prophesying having his head covered. For a man to do this, said by his actions, I am not in authority here. I am under the authority of others. But God has established that the head of woman is man. It dishonors Jesus, his head, for a man to say this by wearing a head covering. But they do. They wear a yarmulke. And you are not the authority here because your head is Jesus. You're praying, right? So you're not the authority. I don't understand this. And at the same time, why is it a big deal? We're talking about how eating a food that was offered to an idol isn't a big deal. We're talking about the state of clean and unclean is not a big deal. It's all a matter of conscience. So why is wearing a hat while you're praying? Why is that a big deal? Who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered? For a woman to do this, said by her actions, I am not under authority here. And because God has established that the head of a woman is man, it dishonors the man, her head, for a woman to say this by refusing to wear a head covering. Under these words of Paul, women are free to pray or prophesy, but only when as they demonstrate that they are under the authority of the male leadership of the church. That is one and the same as if her head was shaved. If a woman refuses to demonstrate being under authority, she may as well be shaved of her hair. In some ancient cultures, the shaving of a woman's head was the punishment given to an adulteress. So, why does Paul think that's a big deal? The way Paul's been talking about, he's been looking at the bigger picture. This doesn't seem to be looking at the bigger picture. This seems to be looking at earthly customs. Having a woman's head shorn or shaved meant different things in different cultures. In Jewish law, it would be a mark of adultery. In the Greek world, it could be the mark of a prostitute or lesbian. Whoa. I mean, it makes sense. Short hair nowadays. That's funny. But I mean, I don't get the. There's no consistency in the logic here, because Why are we worrying about what other cultures may view certain practices? Because if we are not shaving our head because, these different cultures view it in these ways, right? That sounds like we're creating a division between us and the rest of the world, what God wanted in the Old Testament, right? We should be an example. We should be separate from the rest of the world because we shouldn't be acting like them, which is why the idea of circumcision came to be, right? To as a sign that we are this way. We are God's chosen people, and there's the rest of the world, right? So there's a division, which is why there's certain laws that need to be abided by, which is why there's the unclean and clean, the idea of clean and unclean. So the whole idea of it being up to your conscience that the Gentiles can continue to do what they do because it doesn't hurt their conscience if they have accepted Jesus. That goes out the window with this. So the logic doesn't flow here, in my opinion. Unless I'm not understanding Paul. It is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved. Let her be covered. Among the Corinthian Christians, there were probably certain spiritual women who declared that since Jesus, they did not need to demonstrate with a hairstyle or head covering that they were under anyone's authority. In essence, Paul says to these women, if you are going to forsake your head covering, go all the way and shave your head and identify yourself with the women of the world in all their shame. I don't get Paul's logic. I don't. If you guys can explain it to me, let me know.
For that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. For if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved, let her be covered. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. But woman is the glory of man. For man is not from woman, but woman from man. Nor was man created for the woman, but woman for the man. For this reason, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Nevertheless, neither is man independent of woman, nor woman independent of man in the Lord. For as woman came from man, even so man also comes through woman. But all things are from God. Judge among yourselves, is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. But if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom, nor do the churches of God.
But if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom, nor do the churches of God. Giving to contention, quarrelsome, argumentative. But if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom, nor do the churches of God. What does that mean? So if people are arguing about this, then we actually don't have a custom about this. So it shouldn't be a point of argument. So then why say it at all? You're going to cause argument by saying this. In this appeal to apostolic authority, Paul tells the Corinthian Christians not to be contentious, especially because the other churches of God have adopted their custom according to God's truth. What do you mean? Especially because the other churches have adopted their custom according to God's truth. They're saying if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom. So if people are arguing about this, we don't have that custom. I have no clue. $16. The argument and the appeal of their own good sense having been completed, the apostle now adds that if, after all, someone continues to argue the matter captiously and is not satisfied with the reason given, the answer to such a one must be simple. We, the apostles, and the Church of God have no such custom that a woman should pray and teach with uncovered head. It has been suggested that the word custom refers not to the uncovering of the head, but to the contention just mentioned. So some people say we don't have such custom, as in what Paul just said, we don't actually have that custom. And some say we don't have the custom of arguing. I think it's we don't have the custom of arguing because then why did he say all this? So if you argue about this, Paul says, we don't argue about that, nor did the churches of God argue about this. It's so odd. It doesn't fit within his way of thinking and what he's been saying. But the former interpretation seems more natural, and the apostle's object here is not so much to merely censure the contentious spirit, as to show how such an objector must be dealt with. It is noticeable that the appeal is made to the practice of the churches, not the church. Thus, it is not the authority of the church as such that is quoted, but it is the uniformity of practice in the several Christian churches that is appealed to. The church in Corinth has no right to become exceptional. Why not? Why does it have no right to become exceptional? Jesus and Christians are exceptional. Jesus' message was considered radical. So I really don't get this section. It seems like it's going against everything Paul has been saying so far.
Now, in giving these instructions, I do not praise you, since you come together not for the better, but for the worse. For first of all, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you, and in part I believe it. For there must also be factions among you, that those who are approved may be recognized among you. Therefore, when you come together in one place, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper. For in eating, each one takes his own supper ahead of others, and one is hungry and another is drunk. What? Do you not have houses to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God and shame those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you in this? I do not praise you. For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "Take, eat. This is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same manner, he also took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. This do as often as you drink it, in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death till he comes. Therefore whoever eats this bread or drinks this cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. For this reason, many are weak and sick among you, and many sleep. For if we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are chastened by the Lord, that we may not be condemned with the world. Therefore, my brethren, when you come together to eat, wait for one another. But if anyone is hungry, let him eat at home, lest you come together for judgment. And the rest I will set in order when I come.
All right. Paul is a 100% the most confusing guy in the Bible. He is responsible for the most questions that I've had. With this chapter 11, I'm like, it feels like he's contradicting himself a lot. So I'm gonna turn that over to you guys. You let me know. What do you guys think? What do you guys think about this? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And hope you guys enjoyed 1 Corinthians 8-11. I feel like it was an interesting read through study session. I feel like we got some questions answered, but then we raised a bunch of other questions and didn't get them answered. Well, not a bunch, just one or two questions, but didn't get them answered. But let me know your thoughts. What do you guys think? How would you interpret this? Let me know down below in the comment section. Thank you, Ricky. Thank you, Crystal, for checking out today's Bible study session and sticking all the way through. And hope you have a great rest of your day. And I'll see you tomorrow for 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and we'll continue on from there, right? So hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.